The virtual work session of the Annapolis City Council for Thursday, November 19th, 2020 will be called to order. A couple of minutes past 3. At this time, would everyone willing and able please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can I make a suggestion? I think we should take turns doing the pledge just like we do the invocation instead of having that horrible disjointed group.
I think it's cool that we all say it together.
Yeah, if we would say it together, that would be good.
Well, maybe this is the teacher in me, having to lead my class for 20 years to say the pledge every day and hearing 30 different voices at once. It's all good.
Yeah, I think we put the Boy Scouts to shame.
Where's Julian? We should talk about a bouncing ball on the screen.
Okay, now before we go on to the City Attorney, let's hear from Alderwoman Finlayson. She has an announcement, I believe.
Yes, and it's not so much an announcement, but an acknowledgement. There was a fire in my ward about 2 hours ago, and our firefighters saved 3 children who were on the second floor. The house was engulfed in smoke. Quickly, it was a kitchen fire, and they were able to get there in record time almost and save those kids. They're at the hospital now. But I just want to acknowledge our firefighters. They do it for us every day, and we don't often say thank you. But I just thought I'd take a minute to acknowledge the work that they do for us and the lives that they save every day. So thank you to our fire department.
They saved my life.
And we don't hold that against them.
But much to the chagrin of many.
Yeah.
We are very lucky to have a world-class fire department here in the city. They have done their job impeccably throughout the pandemic, and that's why we've got such high ratings. So Chief Romali is doing an amazing job, and I'm grateful for them every day.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. City Attorney, please present the first item on the agenda.
Yes, sir. The first item on the agenda is a continuation of discussion from Special City Council Work Session October 10th, 2020.
Mr. Gerald.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So what our objective was for this meeting was to continue the budget discussions with the turn towards how we might resolve the deficit condition that we have now. So we're going to be preparing the budget process with the departments starting in December. So we wanted to have this meeting to get your thoughts and ideas and input into the budget process of potential reductions or potential opportunities to save money or to increase revenue as we move into the budget preparation process. Again, keep in mind that about 80% of our budget expenses are for salary and benefits. I think we need a holistic solution, and I think some of that's going to have to involve salaries and benefits, whatever that might look like. But we're not going to get there with the magnitude of the deficit that we're currently projecting without addressing that to some degree. We've met once with the union presidents. We're going to have another meeting to get their ideas on potential budget reduction strategies, probably either next week or the following week. But this is your opportunity to share your ideas and concepts for addressing the budget that will help us through this process.
David, may I?
Alderwoman Finlayson.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say, and I don't have a particular recommendation at this point, But I would like to say that, and I've said this many times, and you all think I'm a broken record, we cannot eliminate staff without impacting services. And so I strongly believe that we should do a community survey to see what services the community values and which services they think that we can do something else with. So, you know, I would like to put that out there, that we let the community speak. You know, they're not speaking through us as much as we would like for them to. But I think a community survey may solicit the type of information. And if nothing more, it will get the message out that we're seriously looking at trying to make reductions and that we do want their input in what those reductions are. So thank you.
Finance Director Dickinson was just had a hand up, and then Alderman Arnett.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that OpenGov has a tool called Open Town Hall, which we have. We now have in place. That's a tool for going out and doing online surveys and getting people's impact. We could set that up, you know, with toggles or giving them ratings, what's their priorities, that kind of thing. We could set one of those up relatively quickly and get it out there to get some input. That's all I want to say.
Good idea. Thank you, Jody. Alderman Arnett.
So having professional experience in running large national surveys, I can tell you that that is not something you just whip out a bunch of questions blithely, because the way you ask the question can have a big impact on the answers that you get.
Absolutely.
But we do have somebody in our community, Dan the TAF, who does these surveys regularly. We may be able to impinge on him for some pro bono work very quickly using the tool that Jody just mentioned. And I think that that's a good idea. I think that it's a good idea because we may actually get some information, although I have to say I'm dubious how much it'll give us direction, but it certainly is the right thing to do to let our constituents know, A, we're thinking about the problem, and B, we want to include them in our thinking. But I will later on at the appropriate time in this meeting relay some information that I've been gathering that tells me we don't have enough time. In fact, we may already be too late to do anything really thorough and substantive in time for next May and June of this coming budget year. I'm not sure we even yet have, I have the handouts from the last or the meeting twice ago, I guess, from Director Dickinson. I'm not sure I have a firm grip on what's happening in 2021. I do have the sense that Jody told us how some of that is going to spill over to 2022 and not help matters. I would like to hear a little bit more about how much we plan on digging into our fund balances to pave over 2021. And again, what that does to us in 2022. But I think if we're going to do anything, it's got to be pretty much instantaneous because our time is running out. We've got the holiday period, both Thanksgiving, which I'm going to be pretty sparse for me. It'll be lovely with my wife, but that's it. And Christmas coming up, and the city has got to get going on to doing the budget making now. And we've got to be thinking as a council, if we're going to take advantage of this opportunity that the administration is giving us to provide upfront input into the budget, we really need to get our act together pretty quickly, and as in starting today, in my belief. But anyway, I think that doing the survey is certainly always a good thing. I think we need some professional help from people who do it for a living, if we can get it, to make sure we know what we're getting. I move we adjourned.
It's my job.
Okay.
Alderman Savage, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. City Manager, thank you again for putting this together. And I think I need to start tuning into some of the Finance Committee meetings again. But it's really hard to say with this budget exactly what we need to do. I mean, I guess, so starting where we left off last time, we have, what, about $6 million shortfall? And so even if the unions agree to hold off on their COLAs and the step increases and that kind of thing, that's still only 1.5 million. That leaves us with a 4.5 million shortfall. Furloughs could potentially save, I think, Ms. Dickinson, I think when we discussed possible furloughs, I think that might be able to save us another 1 million. I can't remember what is the exact amount, but I think it was somewhere around there. That's still only $2.5 to $3 million in reductions. So we'd still need another, again, 2.5 or 3 million in savings somewhere. And I mean, just since you asked, I mean, personally, I'm not comfortable with the tax increase, given that we are and will likely probably still be in some kind of economic downturn or at least recovery. I'm also hesitant to agree to a tax increase until we get our staff costs under control, because as I think you yourself talked about in a presentation, but also the Finance Committee, we do have staff costs that are growing faster than our revenue. So regardless of our immediate shortfall, that structural imbalance really, I think, is something we need to figure out a solution to. And that, I think, granted, I completely acknowledge that may be I think it is a larger question than this budget alone, because that's going to require some potentially restructuring of our pay grades. I don't even know entirely, but that's something we certainly need to get a handle of. I also feel, as we mentioned last time, we need to put a lot of attention. We can't address this without really digging into our two largest departments that make up 50% of our budget, the police and fire. So I think, as Alderman Arnett mentioned last time, in terms of looking at shifting some of the programs out of the police that are duplicated in the county or state, I think that's something, again, we need to figure out how to have a conversation about if it's appropriate for the council to do in a work session, or the Finance Committee, or just the administration. And it's similar with fire. I mean, do we need 3 fire stations? How long have we had 3 fire stations? How many ladder trucks do we have? Do we need as many ladder trucks if the county and the Naval Academy have ladder trucks nearby? I mean, I was down on Maryland Avenue a few weeks back when the ladder trucks got called out. And again, it was just a lot of duplication. And I get that's sometimes beneficial, but it's also not very efficient financially. So, but it's also, all that said, very difficult to kind of look at this without getting a lot more of the data. And by that, I mean, I've comparing some of the costs over the past, I'd say, 10 years to really get a handle of why some of the department costs have gone up so much. Is it just staff? And has staff numbers increased drastically over those years? I mean, I suspect we put out just as many fires 10, 15 years ago than we do today. And did we hire a lot more firefighters since then? And same thing with the police. So it just seems like there are a lot of efficiencies that could be potentially found. And you know, I'm also supportive of looking at some of the other departments if there are other efficiencies to be found. For example, we've talked about transit before in terms of if we scale back to some smaller vehicles on certain routes or certain times of day, that could potentially save us a lot in the fuel costs. But again, I think that's really a minor amount of money compared to the 2 largest departments. But in any case, you know, again, I think there's a lot of more information I think I need, but hopefully I just don't know right now what our options are and what the plan is, I guess, for the administration or the city manager's office moving forward. to address this? Like, what's the next step after you hear from us today or the next time? What's the next step in leading up to March?
Dave, just before you answer that, Jody, is Alderman Savage correct on the way he's interpreted that? Do you feel like, I mean, I know that we look at numbers, Rob, from 10 years ago. I don't think everything was being accounted for 10 years ago, you know.
So I have to, he's talking about 2 specific departments, and I don't know what's caused the increase over time, if it was because of increased need or that 10 years ago the services were very deficient and they had to add staff, or we have had the adequacy of public facilities. I don't know if that, we know that police has had trouble filling all those positions added for APF. But what about fire? I don't know if we added anything with APF for fire. So I don't know the history enough to answer the question about whether or not we're comparing apples to apples with service levels.
And that,
did we add a new fire station? Did we add a new medic? Do we have more medic units running? You know, are we trying to decrease response time, that kind of thing? And did we accomplish that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about the APF. And again, that's something we set as the council. So if those numbers need to get changed, we can certainly change them and do so in a manner hopefully that won't be affecting level of service moving forward. But I mean, I'm just, again, the point I'm trying to get at is really what I'm wrestling with is trying to figure out exactly why our budget has increased over, you know, again, over that 10-year period quite significantly. And I'm just trying to get a handle of why that is the case.
So in order, it was Alderman Pindell Charles and Alderman Gay and then Alderman Paone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple things in response to Alderman Savage. And we just touched on it a bit about the APF and the police department. And I think at this point it's very premature to basically start talking about, for lack of a better word, gutting the police department. I would assume that with the police department, as with the fire department, there are many federal and state regulations that have to be adhered to when it comes to meeting certain expectations and things that we have to do because of federal and state standards. And we cannot deviate from that because we really have no control over those. I'll take one instance as far as the fire department is concerned. It is a Class 1 fire department, which means I think when Chief Stokes was here, we have no more than about 200 in the entire country. It's based on a long list of criteria that that we meet in order to do that. And it also results in lower premiums when it comes to our insurances, our homeowners and those types of insurances. So when you're talking about something like the fire department, there are more tentacles on it. Also with the police department, we have just been accredited again for CALEA. CALEA is a highly competitive organization that the police department had to go through. It's similar to a Class 1 from the fire department end, where you are looked at, and I participated in the interviews with CALEA, I guess it was pre-COVID, and what has to be done and what kind of police department do we want when it comes to CALEA. In fact, I have notified the chief as well as retired chief from St. Michael's, who's been with our city police department for a while, Miguel Dennis. They will be making a presentation at our next public safety meeting about CALEA and what it involves. Our police department got CALEA certification. Our folks over at the police department got their accreditation, as well as our chief. So when we start talking about, like with anything, it starts to impact other things that we basically have no control over when it comes to federal and state mandates that we must follow. I'm so glad that Alderwoman Finlayson brought up that fire today. We had another fire several months ago in her ward as well. And when we're talking about response times, I mean, literally, if it's your home and it's your children, it makes a huge difference between 30 seconds and 60 seconds. It's fine. We can all sit around and talk about what we're going to do about police and fire. But if you're on the other end of a gun, then you want your police department. And also Alderman Payon, they saved his life, literally, the fire department did. And where would we be if we didn't have Alderman Payon here? But anyway,
much better off.
I'm just indicating how oftentimes we look at things when it doesn't impact us immediately, but when it does, or someone in our family or a loved one, it makes all of the difference in the world. So my question is, what type of police and fire department do we want? Do we want a second-class fire police department? One where we now have reduced rates because we're class one where we have an extremely robust group of officers and firefighters, or we can talk about the county, we can talk about the Naval Academy. One thing I want to bring to your attention, I've had people ask me several times, why, say you have an accident on West Street or Route 2, and the fire trucks show up, and oftentimes the fire trucks stay there, but it might just be an accident. Why do we have maybe a huge fire truck responding? And I'd asked Chief Stokes about this when he was here, and he said because oftentimes when we have those fires, first of all, the cameras show up, which means they take pictures, and they put pictures out there of loved ones when even the family members have not been notified, and there's no covering on those who are there. So they are there to shield the victims as well as the families. And so there are many things about what fire and police do that we don't quite understand, which I mean, maybe we ought to have the suggestion and just have us have a session on and have the police and fire come in and talk about some of the things that we just never even thought about that they do. That was unclear to me and many of my neighbors why that happens. So I'm not going to say that we're wasting time or effort or money, but there are reasons for why they do what they do. They're the experts in their fields. We aren't necessarily. So that's my take on it. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Alderman Gay.
Thanks. I just a couple of things. I think to that point, they are the experts. We, do rely on them, but they rely on us, and our constituency rely on us to, unfortunately, sometimes make tough decisions. And, I think that when that comes to employment in particular, we want to be very careful and, of course, respectful and courteous of the individuals' families and the sacrifices they've made to the city. I had an opportunity to get on a call with both Chief Romali and Deputy Chief Spriggs this last week and get a better understanding of how the department works and what takes place in fire. And, I was extremely surprised to, just hear and understand that they're operating 3 fire departments with less than $1 million. And the bulk of their, expenses, which is the other 21 million, is, salary and pension. And I talked to Ross today about this, just trying to get a better understanding of how that works. That was just mind blowing to me. So it's the elephant in the room. We have to look at it, unfortunately. And so I think that from my perspective in the shortfall, I would never, I think cutting employees should be the last, go-to. There should be conversation as it relates to, obviously, the tax that we can control. But one of the things that I mentioned in our last meeting is what revenue are we bringing into the city, and how are we creating new streams of revenue so that we don't have to make the drastic cuts, or so that we, don't have to cut as much as we think we have to. What new businesses are we bringing in? Are we creating interactive settings where families are coming to the downtown area to spend more money in our small businesses. I think those are all things that we have to look at as well. The old saying, sometimes you got to spend a little to make a little. So just I think that for me is where I stand, seeing where we also look at our partners I've mentioned previously and the state, and looking at the disrespectful payment in lieu of tax that we receive. And again, and our partners in the county that don't pay anything. And I understand that there are a number of overlapping services, but you have to come to the table with something to assist your partner in need. We are still a part of the county, and sometimes the service don't, relate to the dollars that we spend. And we just need we need cash. We don't need the service. Sometimes, the service is unneeded as much as the dollar is wanted. So just exploring those avenues so that we don't have to make the drastic cuts. And another thing, I've been big on our top-heavy government, and where we have a number of employees that, obviously make over $100,000. And that's something that we talked about in the last budget go-round. And, when things get tough, you would hate to, again, take from the bottom. So that's something that I think is a priority, too. And lastly, just as it relates to police, we did get a commitment at the last meeting or work session that we had of $4.5 million in cuts to go towards social programs. That was on camera. That was in our meeting. So we do have room to explore how we can assist in other ways without making drastic cuts.
Next was Alderman Paone, then Alderman Finlayson, then Alderman Arnett.
Thank you. I go back to what my colleague from Ward 6, Ward 5, no, Ward 7, excuse me, Rob was talking about some time ago. And I think that he brought up any number of really good points. The problem we have, one of the problems we have, is that we sit around and talk about it like we're doing right now, and nobody's doing anything about it. I, for one, am willing to, help look into where we can cut costs and get specific with what I think we can do. People have brought up the police and fire departments, and okay, they are a large part of the budget, but I don't have any particular desire to pick on either one of those two. One of them saved my life, saved my house when I had a house fire. And the other one, well, I worked with for 37 years and have a lot of friends there and a lot of tradition. I'm certainly not one to go unfairly go after that two group, either one of those two groups, quite the opposite. I do think that we need to make a study, and probably involving 2 or 3 people on the council, if not some outside folks, to see what we need to do to make a sustainable budget. Frankly, not even bankruptcies really would be the, if the world turned upside down, even that's not really the answer, because what do we do after we come out of bankruptcy? We've got the same problems that exist in terms of sustainability. There are some fundamental things that we need to change, and now's as good a time to look at those as any. This isn't, I'm not talking about, next year having a couple of furloughs here or there, or putting off union raises or union action of some type that will help us temporarily. Those are Band-Aids. We've got some fundamental issues that we need to settle on. And to tell you the truth, in my 12 years on the council, we are much more, let me put it this way, we're much more likely to do what we're doing now, sitting around talking about it, than doing anything about it. We clearly need to take action. Now's the time. It's, we had a chance during the budget process, and, some of us supported certain things that we didn't win on. I get it. That's behind us. Tried, didn't win, but there are things that have to be done. We can't keep doing this. And this isn't the first time for those of us that have been on the council. This is not the first time, we've really been behind on the budget. Back in, I believe it was either 2009 or 2010 when the economy really headed south. Let me tell you, I've got a world of respect for some of the actions that Mayor Cohen took at that time. As a matter of fact, Mr. Mayor, he even got me to vote for his budget. That's how much I liked what he was doing. Whoa. In some cases. But look, we're not. It's not all doom and gloom by any means. This is a great place, and we've got a good chance of turning things around a little bit. But if we don't do something, I think, fairly substantial, we're really going to be in a world of hurt. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Finlayson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, let me defend surveys. And I've done surveys for hundreds, literally hundreds of thousands of teachers around the country when I was a director with the National Council of Urban Education Associations. A lot of mouth. Anyway, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Urban centers around the country do surveys all the time that seek out the type of information that we need. So it's not like we have to start from scratch. And if there are professionals in our community who can help us with this, I'm sure they would agree that this is not something that has to be very difficult or timely. I think it's really important that we seek out information from the community in some form or fashion. And Jody, thank you for sharing with us the version that's attached to one of our computer programs. And if that can be also sent out in paper copy, that would be great, because we have a large percentage of our community who's not doing the emails, and I would hate to not get their input. I think Fred just kind of hit the nail on the head by saying that here we are talking about it again. When do we do something? I think it's important that we add details to our comments. Rob made a lot of points in his initial remarks. Out of control, which was the first note that I wrote down. What does that mean? In what form or fashion are we out of control? Is the fire department out of control? Is transportation out of control? Is it because they have too many people, too few people? How are they out of control? Jody mentioned furloughs. We need the data on what that means. If we furlough everyone, what's that benefit to us? If we furlough everybody, and I'm saying 1 day, or we furlough everybody 10 days, what's the savings on that? And is there a true savings? Are we talking about weighing financial with public safety? Because that's what I'm hearing a lot. So what's more important? Response times, or I don't even know what the other thing would be. But anyway, I would suggest, and I know David is taking copious notes on everything we say. We keep hearing, how did we get here from, 10 years ago? Well, Ross and I have been sitting here for 12 years, 13 years. We had more employees back then when we came on, well over 700 employees. And we're down to, I guess, a little over 600. So maybe if we bring in the department heads and give them the questions in advance, come prepared to share with us why your department has grown as it has over the last 10 years. I am sure part of that will include the fact that our employees went without pay raises for many years, at least until 2013, when we did the IBB, gave everybody a 10% pay raise, trying to get us to where we were compatible with surrounding jurisdictions. But the department heads can tell us this. And those that are new, they can do the research and still be prepared to tell us how we got to where we are. We're talking pay structures. And I keep hearing over, people that make $100,000. Well, if you've worked for 20 or 30 years in a job, yeah, you expect to be able to make $100,000. That would be a goal. So look at the number of years it's taken to get someone to that level of pay. And if we can't afford to have people of that level of pay, then weigh the benefit to not having those years of experience. So we really need to get down to the root of the problems as some of us see them. But we've got to bring in the people who can give us the answers instead of us just kind of, because we're saying the same thing over and over. You know, how do we get to the root of where we are and what are the best avenues for getting us out of it? And I believe that the department heads have the information to help us. So I say that we bring them in individually and have this discussion with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just get a weigh in from City Manager Gerald and then over to Ross?
Alderman Savage asked what the next process or next steps were in this process. So recall that we're asking for your input today. The next step will be that we're going to meet with the unions and we're going to ask for their input. We've already asked for them, but we'll receive it at that meeting. And then it transfers to the department. So we'll put together some budget directions and budget guidance to go to the departments in December so they can build their budget. So that's the opportunity for what Alderwoman Finlayson talked about, for them to build their budgets in accordance with what your recommendations are, what we're hearing from the unions and what we need from them as far as budget cuts to balance the budget. So that's sort of the process. After we get that put together, then there'll be a mayor's budget submitted, and then it'll come back over to the council to ask those questions again of how did you do it and what does it look like for your department and what are your thoughts about it? But that's what the process is. So this first step, we wanted to get your input before we turn it over to the departments to build their individual budgets.
May I respond?
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Gerald, it's hard for us, I believe, to give recommendations on where the cut should be without having all the information. And by that, I mean, you know, the historical context from the department heads, okay? Their recommendations to us as far as what their departments can afford to lose. You know, I think that's important. I don't want us to walk away feeling like we don't have anything to say because we don't know what to say. I just think I think we need another opportunity as a council to get together. You know, the outline that you've just given us is great, but it leaves us still out until decisions are already made. And I think some of us would like to make some more concrete decisions or recommendations, but we don't have the information to do that. So, you know, I would like for us to meet again, but this time with the head of the fire department, with the police chief, with the transportation director, and ask them how we got here and what we can afford to do. That's the only way we're going to have input.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. This is such a chicken and egg type of thing, right? Because, you know, we've never done this, at least in my time here, we've never tried to do this in the fall where we get budget guidance from the council because it is hard. And I'm not sure what information we would even provide at this point. So the directors are all on this call, so they're all available to answer questions, but I'm not even sure what information we would provide at this point to allow you to make those decisions. So that's why, in working with the Finance Committee and the Finance Chair, we decided to give this a go in the fall to try and get some, number one, to afford the council the opportunity to provide some ideas so that as we move into the formal budget development process in December and then early next year, that we'll have some of your thoughts. But it's hard. It is hard for you. And I guess we kind of knew this. Alderman Arnett and I talked about this a lot, that this is a hard process without all that information. But what does all that information even mean other than the information that we've already provided, that revenues are going to be significantly lower than expenditures as we have currently projected them, and that we need to submit a balanced budget next spring as part of the mayor's budget. And so how do we get there? We will get there, but we thought it would be valuable to get your input on and some of your thoughts on things that would be amenable to you all when you see the mayor's budget. If you see some of these things that we've talked about this fall, otherwise it's catching you unawares, and you won't have had a chance to discuss it. You won't, everything will have to be explained, which it will be anyway. But that's why we're trying to do this, is to try and get some input from you all before we start that budget development process.
Thank you, Dave. I'm just trying to be proactive here. This is a new process, so thank you everybody for their patience, but it hasn't been done before, but we can get it right working on it together. Alderman Arnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, thank you and the administration. I think this is a very valuable new process, and I'm glad we're doing it with the entire council. I feel the Finance Committee puts in a lot of effort sort of in a vacuum that the rest of the council doesn't get the benefit of until the very last minute, when they're sort of drinking out of a fire hose trying to come to closure on the budget. And so I think this is a much, much better way to do it. I do have to say, like I think Sheila and Fred alluded, that this is a lot like Groundhog's Day. We've covered all of this ground before. We've heard all about federal and state mandates and how everybody's valuable and everybody does a good job, all of which is true. But what's different this year are the 3 pages that were handed out at the last meeting. The first page shows a big hole in fiscal 21, $6.5 million. And there's an important footnote on that page that says includes $3.7 million use of reserves. That cuts down on our cushion. The next page shows us a $7.4 million deficit in fiscal 22. And the third page, which really does start to get us down to brass tacks, is the one that shows estimated increases in fiscal 22, 2 of which I would argue could be considered but need to be done in partnership with the unions and the staff. One is COLAs, the other is step increases. The pension plan, we don't have a choice on that one. We have to pay that. That is a commitment. We can take a holiday, but all that does is build up a huge down the road cost that we're going to have to face only in a bigger and bigger and bigger dollop. It's like borrowing money from a street lender and having to pay the fig but not paying the principal. Debt service, we have no choice on that. Self-insurance fund, I don't think we have a choice on that. Now that's a one-time big jump because we ran it down for the settlement. Capital projects, I'm not exactly sure what's in that $300,000. Fleet funding, if we go back to deferring purchasing new fleet, we're building up another problem for us down the road. But with all of that, $5.4 million, and I submit that only really $2.5 million of that is something that is all discretionary, and it would have to be done in partnership with the unions and with the staff. So we have a real problem now. It is not going to go away, and we are going to have to make some very tough decisions. Now, I am fully in support of a survey, and I agree with Sheila. We can probably get one out pretty quickly. I have a feeling I can tell you quite quickly what it's going to say, but we should still do it. But we have to do something now. Now, we got belatedly in last year's budget book the thing that tells us where the discrete pieces are, and that's the line item budget. That was the data that came out of the Munis and broke down where all of the spending is in each of the departments. It's not finite enough yet. Some of the things, and I know Carol and Doug are going to, they're just waiting for me to say this, but I learned that there are 9 state regions for dogs. The state is providing dogs, bomb dogs, drug dog coverage I think there are things in our police and fire department that don't affect putting out fires and saving children, don't affect saving Fred's life, but could be sent to a higher level and should be sent to a higher level. I do not want to get rid of police. I do not want to get rid of fire. I think we need it. I think our citizens have told us they expect it. I certainly don't want to get rid of clean water in and dirty water out. I don't want to get rid of potholes and sidewalk repairs, but we have to find millions and millions of dollars that we can no longer spend unless we're going to raise the tax rate by somewhere between 13 and 15 cents per hundred in an election year and in front of an electorate where we will have to say, we couldn't figure out where to cut, so we just decided to soak you with a bigger tax payment. I don't know about you, but I'm not running on that. That is not what I want to do, because I have a pretty good notion that if I ran on that, and I am running, that I will get a big fat no thank you from my electorate. I'm already getting a lot of pressure from them about what their tax bills look like. I was talking with Dewan earlier today, and I think we need to remember when we increase taxes, people like me and Herb McMillan, we give up a couple of fine dining out with our family at a restaurant, but people who have no discretionary income, that comes out of their medicine bill or they're off their food table. And so it's the people at the lower end of the economic spectrum who really get killed when we blithely pass a tax bill on them. And I think that's irresponsible and I think quite scurrilous on our part to not do that. So I would suggest, someone said we get a group of people, I'm more than happy to do that. I think we need to work with the line item budget from last time. I think that's going to show we're going to need more explanation. I do think, and I know as a lifelong bureaucrat, we have to do this in partnership with the department heads and with the senior management. We're not up to it on our own. We don't know enough. But when we do this together and we say, guys, we have got to come up with this, and we say to them, honestly, we would like to find any place we can cut that doesn't cut a job, but these numbers are too big to be talking about that. We're already this year not filling jobs, so that takes away some of our flexibility. So the way we could have done it in the past is just don't fill jobs. That's how you'll cut your wage bill down. Well, we're already using that trick right now in fiscal 21, where we are still in financial difficulty. So I would say to you, we don't have any more time. We don't have any more, let's have nice discussions, and wouldn't it be nice if we have to do things now, and we have to do it as a team. We have to help the mayor. We can't just dump this problem on him and say, gee, Gavin, we wish you good luck. We hope you come up with something that's a good solution in April when you turn it over to the finance committee. That's not the right way to do that. This is our responsibility. It is one of the things that the charter specifically assigns to us, the 9 of us, is to manage our finances. And I will admit, I've turned aside. I've looked the other way. I've let things slide, and I've done it as long as Sheila's done it. And we are the ones that have been here the longest doing this. We don't have that luxury anymore. We are going to have to get serious. So Sheila, if we're going to do a survey, let's make a commitment at this meeting. Who's going to get that survey started? Who's assigned that job? If we're going to start digging into the line item detail, let's make a commitment at this meeting today. Who's going to do that? I suggest the finance committee is the logical place to do it, but somebody's got to do that. Frankly, I think it should be bigger. I think we should bring in some of the newer hands to look at this. It'll be a good learning experience, and as we pass the reins on to them, maybe in 20 or 30 years, they'll have that experience. But we've got to get to work, and we've got to get to work today. Yeah, right. We've got to get to work today. We know what the work is. We know what the numbers are, and we know where to look for the history. At Finance Committee, we talked with Director Dickinson about needing to put together that history, and she said justifiably, do you want me to do a budget or do you want me to build you that history? Do you want me to do my regular job or do you want me to take some time off to do that history? Fair enough. But that means we've got to find a way to get that history. And I think it is a line item history. I think it's on the shelves somewhere. And maybe it's something where we get in some help from outside to put that together. But we're flying blind. We do not know what these numbers look like. None of us. I will say for me, I can tell you, I know that I don't know enough about the specific line item details off the top of my head to say, you cut here, and you cut there, and cut there. And I don't know what Doug Romali's going to say to me when he says, if you do this, I can't do that. And if you don't want me to provide that service anymore, you make that cut. And he is the one who knows what happens when we make off-the-cuff kinds of decisions. So I would urge you, let's take advantage of this opportunity that Gavin and the administration have given us. Let's do our jobs. Let's help each other out. Let's help Gavin out. Let's help him be a successful mayor and run this administration. And let's get to work. I mean, I'm ready. You can tell I'm fired up. I think we can commit to the survey. We'll find out what Jody has. Call Dan the TAF if he can help us with that. If we need that, if we don't, Sheila, if it's somebody else we can go to, I welcome that. Let's get that out there. But let's also get to work on the numbers, do the hard work, work with David, work with Jody, work with the department heads, and look at it and lift up the hood and say, well, what about this? You know, can we not do that any longer? What happens when we decide that? Because we cannot, we can sit on our hands and march right into a bankruptcy and take a hit on our bond rating. And as Sheila, I believe, suggested, we come out the other side, we still have all of the same problems facing the city. Every one of them. It's just like going bankrupt on your credit card and then taking out 10 new ones and building a new deficit. We can't do that. We have got to get to work. And I hope either people will commit to doing that or support those of us who will commit to doing that and doing that right now, because I think that's the time. I will tell you, I had exploration with people who know what they're talking about. This whole notion that was in the paper about shift services over to the county, that can't possibly happen in time, even if the county wanted to do it. There would have to be a negotiation going on between Gavin and Stewart. There would have to be fact-finding groups. There would have to be all kinds of studies that would have to be talking about where do the tax dollars get shifted, all of those things. That is at a minimum, from what I'm understanding, a 2-year process. At a minimum. We don't have 2 years. We have 2 months before we start working on heading off this crisis. We're in the crisis, but heading off the growing crisis. So, you know, we can't look elsewhere. We can't look, let's let the county do it. We can't look at, let's contract it out to the private sector. That costs money too. Let's just stop doing it. Okay, fine. We'll stop running the buses. $7 million. Boom, right there. We're done. I don't think that's going to fly. And I think we have a lot of tough work and a lot of analysis that we have to dig in and get onto right now. I'm muting myself.
Alderman Finlayson had a hand up first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you. If I could have muted you, I would have, Ross. Your inflammatory language. We can't make arbitrary decisions. I said it once, and I'm going to say it again, because some of you think you need to repeat what has been said. We need to gather the information, and the department heads, I believe, are the key to that. Whether it's the finance committee who's going to take this on, if the whole group does not want to, we need to bring in the department heads, and we need to ask them to give us the historical references that led us to where we are today. So we can look at what was done to increase our budget over this 10-year period so that we can decide whether we want to rescind any of those decisions that we've made. Okay? We can call Dan the TAF today and see if he is available to help us. Jody and Ms. Dickerson and Mr. Gerald. We have found funding for that, of course. But I think we can do it. Now, maybe we should assign different pieces to this. But I agree, we need to get started. We need, or we're going to get the budget in April and our input will not be there because we don't have the information we need. So please, let's assign ourselves responsibilities so that we can get this done.
Alderman Pindell-Charles and Alderman Gay had their hands up the way I saw it.
Mr. Mayor, I think Alderwoman Tierney, then Alderman Gay, and then me.
Sorry, Ellie, you've been moving around the screen, so I haven't seen your hand.
Sorry,
I apologize.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm getting used to. I'm in the club room of the condo, and I'm supposed to have my mask on because it's technically public, so I'm a little bit. Anyway, so I'll try to be quick. I think everybody comes from a different perspective, and my perspective is estimating. And on the survey, I don't believe we have time. And if we were going to spend the money, I would spend it differently. And this is why. Right now, at this point, I believe we have a fixed budget. I think we all have to believe in that we have a fixed budget, assuming that we were not going to raise taxes, because that's just a Band-Aid. So we have a fixed budget. And what's the first thing I would do is ask, how much revenue do we have? Have we explored, number one, and priority, have we explored all revenue options? Okay. I don't know if we've done that or not. In my experience, when I estimated a building, you didn't cut off a floor to save money. You evaluated systems, you evaluated efficiencies, you evaluated hidden costs. I'm echoing. Anyways, and to Sheila's point, I don't have enough information to do that. And to David's point, it is a chicken and egg thing. I'm on the audit committee. We're looking at we're defining performance standards now. How am I going to evaluate performance efficiency if I don't know how much that stuff costs? I don't know how much it costs to respond to a fire. I don't know that. And so that's the data we need. We need a consultant to translate our budget into a performance estimate. In other words, how much does it cost for our city to function? I don't want to go in and start chopping away, and when we don't necessarily have to do that. So I would strongly support not a money for a survey. That's just passing the buck to the residents. And then that we have to take responsibility for what we're going to do that affects our city services. We have to take that responsibility. And then when we have a plan, that would be an opportunity for each of us to reach out to our constituents. But I do not want to rely on my residents to say, hey, what should we cut? Because it's not necessarily cutting services. It's evaluating our efficiencies, our performance, and we don't have that data. And I would strongly suggest that that's something that we consider and use the money for to help us with that. And there's two other things is when we evaluate our budget and we assume that it is a fixed budget, what are our fixed costs? What are those absolutes that we cannot touch? And that would be the union stuff. You have to go through and say, we can't touch this. That's the first thing that you do. I'm not going to cut off air conditioning in a building, And so the other thing is, what are the overlays with the county? We talked before about doing a responsibility matrix between the police department and our social services. Okay. So it's a long way of saying we don't know what we have. We really don't. we don't know we don't know how much our services cost. And if you can tell me, that's great. I think the department that probably has the closest information to that is probably the fire department. They probably do know how much it costs to put out a fire. But we need to know that before we start cutting money. And that's my contribution.
So Alderman Pindell-Charles and Alderman Gay still, and then Alderman Savage. That's what I saw.
I think Alderman Gay, and then me, and then okay. Alderman Savage.
I'm not fussy. No problems.
That's Gay. Okay.
Thanks. I agree with really all of what most of my colleagues have said, and just I'll throw out what I support quickly. I do think that Sheila was right on the money when she said that we need to hear from the department heads. I think that when we had in the last budget season, those meetings when they brought forth the PowerPoints, broke everything down, that was helpful. But to Ross's point, I would like to see more of a line item budget where it's like, we just don't see, $200,000 supplies and whatever. No, what is that $200,000 being spent on? Down to the office chairs, so we can really get a better understanding of how everything is spent so that we don't have to cut staff. We can make cuts other places with paper and stuff. I mean, we can get down to more emailing. I mean, just the little stuff so that we don't really have to look at, affecting the morale and stuff of the staff. Another very interesting thing that I heard in the dialogue was that we had just over 600 staff members, that down just from 700. I think 2 administrations ago they stated. I'd just be curious to hear from the city manager more of a breakdown of where the bulk of that staff lies. I'm assuming again that it's probably in the 2 departments that we've talked about already, which I hate for it to appear as if we're picking on public safety. And to the point that Alderwoman Pindell-Charles made, if a gun is in my face, obviously I want the police there. But what does that look like in regards to having conversations in public safety? Does it mean that I'm taking an officer off the street with a gun? Or does it mean, again, that I am just, delaying buying new desks for the department for a couple of years? I mean, just those little things. So if I could, just, again, get some understanding from the city manager, and maybe even the finance director of what their understanding of this deficit is right now, so that we could get a clear vision. Again, I don't even know, to Ross's point, the exact number that we're talking about. Have there been conversations to, look at loans or whatever? Obviously, bankruptcy is a word that I don't even like hearing as it relates to city government. So I don't even want to think about that. What other options have we considered? If we could just hear from them, please.
Who wants to go first, Dave or Jody? I think we've got to stop throwing this bankruptcy thing around. We're talking about percentage points here. We're not talking about some overall, huge, insurmountable.
So the budget book has a breakdown of the number of personnel per department. So we're happy to provide that. Loans are not an option. We need to have a balanced budget. So we either need to increase revenue or cut expenses, or both, but loans are not a good option. I'm not sure what some of your other questions were. Yeah, so Jody, if you have any additional input, that would be great.
I think that's great when you. I'm sorry, Jody. Go ahead.
I was just going to say your service delivery departments are police, fire, planning and zoning, DPW, and rec and parks. Everything else is an administrative function, and it's been my observation that your administrative departments are very thinly staffed. So you're looking at those departments when you're thinking about what kind of services could you trim back, even if it's intended to be on a temporary basis. Where can we find those service reductions? And I do think that's going to have some input from department directors and to where they think the options would be. As far as staff, that's where I'd put the staff. Those are your service. your service delivery departments, and that's where you've got to look. And to hear from them would be useful. I wouldn't want to take out a loan. We could, but that's just deferring the payment till later. You know, we've talked about pulling back. We have a pension contribution increase that we have to fund next year. We've talked about that. You can do that. That's discretionary, but you're putting off something that's inevitable to have to cover in the future. There's a lot of ideas. None of them are ideal, but we're trying to get from you here where you think is the best place to go, or do we just try to find things across the board and trim back everything a little, you know,
just
percent.
Just quickly, my last 2 points, David, you mentioned, you said, we're looking at how to create revenue and stuff. If you could expand on that, please, again, because in my mind, you know, how do we do that with the restrictions of COVID? When I think of, you know, where the bulk of our revenue comes from, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm usually thinking of the events that the city hosts that attract individuals to the city, you know, what's the croquet and just, you know, all the fun things that we are probably not going to be able to do. So what other ways do we create revenue? Obviously looking at bringing in new businesses, but could you just expand on that a little bit more? And then my last point is I liked what Alderwoman Tierney used the phrase, I think you said where you was just saying set budget, this is it. Because as it relates to, if we don't look at increasing taxes, which I'm not, you know, a fan of right now, because to Ross's point earlier, we discussed, it's not the people at the, you know, the top that will be affected. It's the people, and not even really the people at the bottom, because they typically don't pay a property tax. It's the middle class family, which is, you know, quickly evaporating. So I do like that phrase of set budget, and this is it. So just how quickly to your point of revenue sources and things like that, how can we expand that?
Yes, so what we're trying to do right now is, as you know, these are extraordinary times. We've projected the extraordinary times to continue into FY22, and that's why we're facing these deficits that we are right now. It's because of coronavirus, we've had to reduce the amount of revenue that we're expecting to draw in. Keep in mind that 80% of our general fund revenue is from real estate taxes. So there's not a lot we can do. So everything else is sort of on the margin. The other 20% is things like hotel tax, you know, all of the whatever little money that we get from the state, you know, all of those other sources, but the majority of it by far is the real estate. So there's not a lot of flexibility that we have other than to raise the rate on the property tax, which nobody wants to do. And we're not even going to put that forward, which means that we have to look at the expense side. So that's what we were hoping for today, is some high level guidance on what cuts would be supported by the council on the expense side of things, because I think that's what we're really going to have to deal with. The department directors are going to be involved. We're getting ready to start the budget process, and the departments prepare their budgets. And so they're very much involved with this process. And remember that you have professional staff that are going to be involved with putting this budget together. What we were really hoping for today, again, was high level ideas from the council as we move into that phase of the budget development with the departments.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gerald. I'm next.
Alderman Pendle-Charles.
Thank you. Couple things that I'm hearing. I'm hearing, looking at paper and copier, and I harken back to my days in Baltimore City when we were budget cutting, and we were literally picking paper clips off the floor and saving them. So I don't think we want to get to that. I know I've talked about furloughs, but not in the best sense. We went through that in Baltimore City. We all went down to the War Memorial. The state's attorney told us we had a choice. It was done in levels. The attorneys were furloughed about 7 days. The support staff, I think, was 3 to make it easier. Otherwise, those who were left, if we didn't do that, got the bulk of the work. So I'm not saying necessarily furloughs, but we're in unprecedented times. So my bent on furloughs for this term and for this situation has changed. Also, I'm hearing about overlays with the county. Some things we just can't put a price tag on. Some things are intangible. And so the things we can put a price tag on, fine, but there are some intangibles that we need to look at. As far as surveys are concerned, and surveys are fine, but I hearkened to some surveys recently that Anne Arundel County Public Schools did. And there were, and usually what happens, a certain group of people respond and a certain group of people don't. And so it was with these surveys, it was extremely lopsided. And so that's my take on surveys at some point. I would like to also have those federal and state mandates that we have no control over, maybe to be put on the list of information that we receive, especially regarding public safety. I think that would be extremely helpful to see what these federal and state mandates are, so we can actually see what we really have no control over. Again, when I was in Baltimore City, we did ride-alongs. Every time I tried to do one, something came up, then I retired. But I think ride-alongs for the police and fire, and I think Alderman Gay did something akin to that. But I think that's good to see on a Saturday night or a Friday night or whatever the peak times are, to see exactly what goes into being a firefighter and a police officer, and what detectives have to do, and what the SWAT team does, and how that's all situated in this whole profile. As far as the price tag on items, back in January of 2019, I decided that we would take a portion out of our public safety meeting for two things. One thing, Spotlight, which was where we spotlighted good things that our staff were doing as far as police, fire, and Office of Emergency Management. And the second thing was a did you know? In other words, did you know about such and such thing in these different departments? The first thing that we did, and fire department, and Chief Stokes was very elated about it, we did he put together a Price is Right. And they laid out about 6 different items, anywhere from something that cost maybe $2 or $3 to something that was up in the $30,000 mark. And what it cost to replace it, was it worth repairing it? And Alderman Payon and then Alderman Henson and I had to guess whether the price was higher or lower. And it was extremely difficult. And we had people actually tuning in real time, watching and in real awe about what the cost of items are. So we did it on a simple scale, and I thought it worked out very, very well to find out exactly, and for all of us, and it was done for budget purposes as well, for my colleagues to see the price tag on things. But I think that would be helpful. But I think those types of things, we need concrete matchups to what we think we can do without and why maybe we can't do without it, or what's the downside to that and what's the intangible that we lose out on for those things. And I think those were the things on my list. Thank you.
I got the prices right correct every time, by the way.
No, you didn't.
All right,
Don't
a
tell
lot of
that.
hands. Alderman Arnett, then Alderman Tierney. You want to fight it out with Sheila, Rob?
What about
No,
me?
that wasn't a hand. That wasn't a hand. I just
okay.
muted myself.
Rob, you're Alderman Tierney, so
So there are potential alternate sources of revenue, but I would argue we're never going to have a prayer seeing either one of them unless we show the stomach to make some reductions in spending. Both of the ones that I have in mind have to come from the state. The first one is they can give us a reasonable pilot. That could help out quite a bit. And I think that if we can make the case, take it to them reasonably quickly about the duress that we are in, I'm sure multiple other municipalities in the state can make those similar cases. The other one is to get a piggyback tax on the sales tax. The state is loath to give away any of those revenues because they like to keep the money for themselves. But I've always thought it was a terrible shame that we're such a source of sales and revenues as a economic center in the state, and it just goes away somewhere else. And it doesn't really make any difference how much we do for our businesses and how successful they are. We're not going to see the fruits of that labor. And I think this is a Gavin level kind of initiative. Certainly some of us can help, but I don't even know who does lobbying for us anymore. Do we have paid lobbyists? But it seems to me like this would be a real source. Another lesser source would be as we start identifying, and we must be doing something right because we're starting to identify more and more people who are getting caught up in the short-term rental net. But that could be another potential source of revenue if we're thinking about something over and above the inspection fee, which is basically supposed to be the cost of doing the inspections. But if we wanted to and could legitimately with state permission add on to that. Now, we'll get pushback, probably even directly from the mayor, but certainly from the hospitality industry, that as we tax the visitors, we drive away visitors, which drives people away from our hotels and restaurants and all the other amenities. So these all come with a two-edged sword. But certainly the pilot and a piggyback sales tax are things that could be legitimate things to approach in terms of new revenue sources. But I think we really have to demonstrate that we're willing to dig in and bite the bullet before we'll merit getting that kind of consideration from the state.
Ross, on the back of that, can I just ask Jody, how much do we see of any kind of sales tax? So I was on a COVID call with the county, talked about what actions we're going to take, and roughly estimated 130 restaurants in the city. There were, this county has 4 times as many as that are licensed. I think there's the number they gave me. But we're only 10% of the population. So the revenue from all those restaurants, and I'm sure they're as busy as any in the county, surely we produce a much greater amount of revenue and sales tax from the city compared to other parts of the county.
So we don't get any of the sales tax, the 6%. Not anything in any kind of we get a fee or a tax from electricity, gas, telephone, fuel. Those sources are coming to us, but we don't get any general sales tax from the 6%. I do believe the county gets a cut of that. I don't know if some of it started coming to us, how that would affect the county's analysis of our property tax rates, how, they give us the tax differential and they calculate that. And if that would impact it, if they're getting less revenues and we're getting more, how that would impact their calculations. It may feed into that calculation somewhere that they get all the sales tax.
I agree with you, Ross, anyway. Sorry. Next, I think, was Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just in terms of the question about pensions, I mean, for me personally, anyway, typically I hold that as really kind of a sacred agreement because it's not just with current employees, but past employees. And I'm really hesitant to reduce that at all, especially, I guess I'm more inclined to do, freeze salaries than I am to reduce pension contribution. However, considering this unprecedented downturn and everything, and then I think I'm more inclined to at this point to possibly consider like a break on the pension contribution, at least in the short term until we get back to normal. And in terms of public safety, it's certainly not my intention to pick on them. I have no intention to do that. It's just that they make up 50% of our budget, and it's really, I don't even know what percentage of our staff, but I think it's really hard to make these reductions without looking at them. And in terms of calling for the department heads, I'm not so keen on that idea either. I mean, I think we've done that before, and it hasn't always been too productive because I think they all just end up getting very, defensive of their own and don't want to make any reductions. But I think it's more productive at this point to, I'm fine with having the city manager have those discussions. They're his employees. And I think he could have a much more productive conversation with them and to identify some of the potential deep cuts and take a deep dive on this. Because, I don't think most of us necessarily have the time to take a really deep, a thorough analysis of this that would be needed. I think the finance committee certainly would have more ability to do that, but the rest of us, I'm not quite so sure. I think we're all capable. It's just a matter of time. So I'm completely happy relying on our professional staff in this standpoint. I really appreciate Mr. Gerald for your willingness to listen to us and incorporate that. I really appreciate these meetings. So now I think it's just up to the balls and going to be in the administration's court to, and I don't know what the city manager would prefer, but I'd be happy with either just your own recommendation after you identify some potential solutions to this deficit or provide us with a couple different options. I think that'd be good as well. In terms of the survey, I'm not quite so sure about it. I know we've done it in the past and it's had some useful results. And frankly, I'm not sure we have time because we really only have 3 months left until March, when we really have to have a clear idea of what we're going to do about the budget. But I'm also, I don't know, it also depends on how it's worded. I'm a little concerned about it in the sense that I think everybody's going to say they value public safety as their top priority. They don't want to see anything cut. But again, I don't think, I personally just don't agree that the statement that any cuts automatically result or would mean a reduction in services. Like I've said, I think we can find efficiencies without eliminating core services. And last, I just want to correct my estimate. I was using the wrong number. It's a $7.5 million deficit. Thank you, Alderman Arnett and Ms. Dickinson for clarifying. So it's $7.5 million, potentially reduced to $5 million if we get the salary freeze, and then another $1 million perhaps on top of that if we do furloughs. But that's still, again, $4 million shortfall. And so we certainly, I think, need a bit more discussion. And but again, I'm happy with allowing the city manager to have these discussions with staff to figure out next steps. Thank you.
Alderman Finlayson was next. Alderman Finlayson, what was the $1 million shortfall in 2009? Do you remember that number when you had to bring everybody to Maryland Hall to discuss what your actions would be?
I'm sorry, was that the year we did the furloughs?
I'm assuming it was.
And layoffs.
And we laid off 32 or 33 people.
Do you remember what the shortfall was? Do you remember how many millions of dollars you were short then?
I don't recall. Ross?
I think it was somewhere on the north side of 10 million, but remember that you need to age that forward by the cost of living. So it was a bigger deficit than we're showing on paper now. So, that gives me solace that if we can act quickly and get on top of this, we're not going to be in as desperate straits as we were then. And that's why this effort, I think, is a very wise one. But it was pretty big as a percent of the budget.
If I remember correctly, that was the amount of the tax anticipation note that we took. I'm not sure that that's
$210 million. $210 million.
Okay, it was $210 million. It's okay.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think it was quite that high. But we did lay off 30 some people, and today, we still feel the impact because none of our departments have receptionists. So, for example, if you call the planning department, you get a staff person, whoever's available to answer the phone, because there's no receptionist, and there hasn't been one since we made those cuts. So I disagree that, making cuts will not impact services. It will always impact services. You may not feel it, you may not want to recognize it, or you may not recognize it, but others will. Mr. Gerald, are we keeping, or can we keep a grid of these ideas with a column that says doable and one that says not, so that we don't have to revisit the things that won't work as opposed to the things that do? And my question for Ms. Dickinson, talking about the pension. When we came on the council, our contribution to the pension was 3%, and it got up to 3%. Okay. 3%, yes. And prior to that, it was 0 because we were funded at 130%. So that administration didn't feel the need to contribute. I thought that was a mistake, and we did start contributing again. We went to 6%. When we entered interest-based bargaining, which would have been around 2010, we were at 6%. Through interest-based, we agreed to take it to 18%. And we were not the highest in surrounding jurisdictions, but we were trying to get there. I think we are at, 22% today?
So, yeah, we were doing 18 up through, I think, fiscal year 18, and increased it to 20 and then 22. This year in 21, we're doing 28%. And that was because of the actuarial study that says our assumptions are still not properly reflective of what our experience is. That the pay raises were higher than anticipated, and the people are living longer than they're anticipating, and the investments weren't earning as much as had been worked into the calculation. So all those things together, we need to go to 28%, but ultimately we need to get to 33 next year.
Okay, which is, I don't want to say astronomical, but is astronomical. I would like to know what surrounding
I was going to add that this is police and fire, okay? Right now in the state plan, which is the better half of our, more than half of the workforce, we're paying 9.38% now. No, we went up to 10.12% this year, and I assume we're going to get a little bit of a bump for next year too. So we're at about 11. I just want to clarify that. Go ahead.
So my question is, what would the impact, and I know what the actuaries are going to say, but what would the impact be if we froze ourselves at 22%, where we are today, until this difficult time passes? When we moved and worked diligently to get to the higher rate, Moody's was giving us a downturn. And part of the plan that we had to present to them was how we were going to get the police and fire pension at a comparable rate. And that worked because then they upgraded us afterwards. So what would the impact be if we froze our contribution, say, for 3 years or 5 years?
All right, so we're at 28% now, not 22%. And the difference that on that chart, I gave you 5 bullet points of some of the increases for FY22. I can't remember the pension number. It was, I think it was $1 million something on that list.
1.138.
Yeah, that gets us from 28 to 33%. If you're saying we freeze it at 28%, So what happens? Well, our pension liability grows, and then we have our recommended contributions start to grow in the out years. And if we're not going to make that contribution, the rating agencies are going to evaluate that with all the other things they consider when looking at our financial health. I don't know if one item like that would say, okay, we're going to downgrade you. They look at a lot of components, but that is one of the more serious ones they look at. Are we keeping our reserves where they need to be? And are we contributing to our long-term liabilities like we need to be? So we are planning for those future hits. So I can't say one way or the other how that one decision would impact the ratings. I guess they may change our outlooks to stable or negative, and then say if you don't turn it around in a year or two, they may say, then we're going to take a look at downgrading your debt.
Well, isn't this a question? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Isn't this a question you could pose to our bond counsel to get I can ask them that. What do they think if we were to freeze at 28% now and not increase it? I will ask that question to them. But I think they're probably going to tell you what I just told you. They consider a lot of factors in their decisions, and I don't know how and what that one. I will ask them what that one factor would do to the rating agency's thought process. At the same time, ask them what other actions would impact their decision. Surely we are not the only ones in this position. I would dare say every municipality is in a similar position.
Right.
And for us to be able to pay, while the rest of the state is paying 11% into the retirement, we're at 28%, looking at going to 32. That's a lot. And so how is everybody else dealing with it? And how are the rating agencies responding to everyone else's efforts? What's everybody else doing to protect their bond rating during this very difficult time? Thank you.
Manette?
So first of all, I think we need to give Jody a pay increase because she needs some heat. Her clearly has to wear.
You're taking away her staff. I mean, you know.
Has to wear mittens. God, we have such a hard fight to climb back to get where we're starting to be, where we need to be with our long-term commitment to our police and fire. And even though we've had discussion about cuts in police and fire, that doesn't mean we don't love them and value them and want to honor our commitment to them. We're talking about $1.1 million. If we do that over 3 years, we are creating a real mountain that we'll have to try to reclimb again. I just think that is not, I mean, we'll do it rather than go into arrears or have to take $10 million lines of credit, which I would note historically, that was mainly because we had a severe cash flow problem because we had run down all of our fund balance reserves. It wasn't because of the economic situation. It was because we had not kept the reserves in our fund balances that were there right for those very things. 5% of each of our funds is flexible. You can use it during the year for cash flow emergencies, amongst other things. So we've gotten ourselves back into great financial shape. And it's been hard, and it's been a lot of work that's a credit to a lot of our finance directors and city managers of the past and present. I just don't want us to get back into that hole again. So again, I've heard various opinions on surveys. I'm a survey person myself. I would be willing, Sheila, if you would be willing to lead that, I certainly, if you want it, would be willing to give you whatever support I can. I don't think it hurts us to do it. I just don't think it's the only thing. And I will make a commitment and would ask for help from anybody who wants to do it to look into the historical time series and building it with a line item level of detail. That's a huge effort. I saw Jody shiver when we talked about it at the Finance Committee meeting. It's not trivial. It is something I have the skill to do. And I think we have to do it. We have to have that. We have to know where we've been before we can figure out where we're going. And I would be very happy to have some volunteers. I have all the materials. As Director Dickinson pointed out, you can't just take the CAFR alone, but I have all the budget books from the past, I think going back to 2002, and I have the CAFRs going back that far as well. And we can make a good stab at putting together the spreadsheets to do that. So I'd be willing to volunteer to do that over the next month. I just won't have Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas, but we can do that. Because I think we need to look at that we just cannot fly in the dark without those numbers in creating our dialogue with the department heads, which we also cannot do this without their their institutional knowledge and their professional expertise. It would be like me trying to do dentistry on Rhonda, I don't think anybody wants that. So we have to have our professionals involved in this. And I think Director Gerald will make sure that we do that the right way. They are all very busy. And so this will be an imposition on their time. But if we can figure out a smart way to do this, it's in their benefit as well as our benefit. So those are two commitments that I will commit to you, Sheila, to help on the survey, and I will commit to lead a team to put together some kind of a spreadsheet with a historical time spreadsheet for that.
Thank you. Alderman Pindell-Charles.
Yes. Regarding the surveys, I can almost predict that many of my residents aren't going to participate in the surveys. What I normally hunker back to is maybe a letter from our community associations, because like with anything, surveys don't work for everybody. And so I don't want it tilted to a certain degree based on the number of people or who responds to the surveys. I can predict pretty much it's going to be a great majority of Ward 3 that's not going to respond to a survey. And I don't want their voices left out. So I'm going to have to find a better way of doing that.
Well, may I ask a question, Mr. Mayor? Mm-hmm. Why couldn't, and I've just pulled up Dan Nataff's number, why couldn't, we don't have to do a survey in a traditional way. We could each distribute a survey in our own wards, however we best communicate with our residents. So, Rhonda, you have 500 people on your mailing list. Why couldn't you distribute the questions and have their answers, I don't know, forwarded to him or forwarded to you, however. But I mean, it doesn't have to be a traditional, we mail it to them and they mail it back. We can be as involved in it as we want to be, I think.
I can tell you, I can mail it out to 500 people. If I get 10 responses, that'll be a lot.
Okay, well, again, it comes down to how we ask the questions. Questions like, do you want your police department not eliminated, but reduced? What would the methods for reducing the city budget best suit you? Would you prefer police, fire, whatever else? I don't know. I mean, it's all how the questions are posed. But I will call Mr. Nataff and see if he's willing to help us and to see, and maybe it isn't doable in the time that we have.
It's not doable for Ward 3. I can tell you that. It's not going to be, I don't care how the questions are framed. It's just not going to work. I mean, I know my residents very well. And if I put a question out there, do you want police? Then I know what I'm going to get back. Rhonda, are you crazy? Of course. So there are questions on there that I can predict what the answers are going to be. Once you start getting into the nuances, it's going to be more problematic. And like I said about the school system survey, they sent them out to everybody. They beat the band, but there were a group of residents, a large group of residents in a large in communities who all responded, and they did everything they could, but it just didn't work. And so that's what I'm just being realistic. I mean, it's a great idea in theory, and for many residents or wards, it will work. It's just not going to work for mine unless it's, do you want police? Do you want fire? It'll be as simple as that. And I can answer that question myself. I don't need to send a survey out for that. So that's just the way it is.
So,
well, okay, I'm done.
Yeah, Alderman Gay. So we'll probably wrap it up after you for the next question, if that's okay, Alderman Gay.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just, I think that the survey might be a decent approach because, again, then we're involving and engaging the community. And unfortunately, we can't do so right now in a typical way they would do, as in coming into City Hall or whatever, because of COVID. And listen, I'm all about putting money in the pockets of the people. And Jody said that in some way, shape, or form, this is related to COVID-19. You hire 20 or 30 community members, get them out into the community, taking the survey in tablet, in paper, or whatever. That way, one, you're putting money into the community, and two, we're getting the information we need by people at the doors or whatever. I mean, we got to get creative with this because at the end of the day, their input is critical, and it does matter if you word it and say, do you want police, yes or no, or saying, would you prefer that the city make, a 3% cut or whatever with some additional details? I don't know. But the wording does make a difference. And I think that, we can't undercut the input of traditionally underserved communities. They don't generally get the information. So we have to come up with ways for them to get the information. And I think, the saying is that the budget is a reflection of your moral values and how you care about people. And so their input is critical right now as they are the most impacted by this pandemic, often losing their jobs and not having any resources. So I'm definitely in support of the survey as long as we get it to the people in alternative ways, not just email. You got to be at people's doors and stuff. So, I definitely think their input is valued.
Thank you.
And they can campaign for us at the same time.
Director Gerald, do you want to wrap it up on this point?
Yeah, if I could just sort of wrap up the whole thing to sort of talk about...
City Manager Gerald. Sorry, David.
Oh, no problem. How I see this going forward. So it sounds like we're going to end up with parallel tracks on the budget. We've got to get the budget out to the departments. We're going to do that in December. We're going to build the budget like we normally do. We've captured all of your input, so thank you very much for that. But we need to move into the budget development cycle because that's a very labor-intensive, heavy lift that we've got to get through in order to put the mayor's budget together. If you'd like to continue with these discussions and bringing in the department heads, we can do that, but that's going to be a parallel track. It's not going to be the same track as the budget development because we've got to move forward with that separately. So we're happy to do that. We can support that as much as possible, but just know that the departments are going to be working really hard to put together their budget input for the mayor's budget. So I think the process that you would be going through would be informing your hearings next spring when you see the mayor's budget. So if that's something that you want to pursue, then I'm certainly happy to help support that to the maximum degree that we can. But we've got to move forward with the budget development as we do every year starting in December.
Just one caveat. I'll do the best I can with a survey and get as much input as I can. I'm not saying I'm going to knock on doors with this pandemic. I'm 66 years old.
May I ask, David?
No, we hire people for that.
Say that again. What'd you say, Mr. Alderman Gay?
I said we hire people for that.
Tell me where you hire them.
COLA has a group of people, Ross. We just heard about them yesterday, did we not? David, can you tell us what you are taking away with this as far as our input into the budget?
Well, we captured all of your notes, so we're going to make a list as you ask, and we're happy to share that with you in case you want to edit it or correct anything that went wrong. Okay. So we'll do that, and we're going to make that available to the departments as well, because this is valuable feedback that we wanted to get so we can understand how better to build the budget. So next spring it makes that process somewhat easier. So we'll share that list of ideas with you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Tierney. Just wrap it up now.
Yeah, real quickly, I just want to, for the record, just recommend revenue opportunities if they haven't been recorded before. I really feel strongly that we should look at implementing Park Mobile in the residential areas. That is a vital source of revenue. I also think that we should task planning and zoning and reviewing all of our fines and fees and see where they can be increased. I know, for example, I'm going to be looking at taxing vacant properties. I hate to use the word taxing, but this is where we are. We have to start looking at that stuff. And the third thing, and I'm not saying this just because I don't have a bed and breakfast anymore, is that it is really viable to increase the hotel tax. I know that the state of Delaware's sales tax is at 8%. The thing with doing that, and the biggest objection is, everybody wants to have an even playing field. If a bed and breakfast owner or a short-term rental person knows that we're doing that across the board, then they won't have a problem with that. And I think that won't be confirmed until we know the results of this consultant and how many they've inventoried, so we get a handle on that. And then we could probably suggest an increase, because you got to understand that's just a pass-through task. The owner doesn't pay that. It's the people coming in, and trust me from experience, they look at New York City's hotel tax. So I think that's a really viable thing to look at down, within the year perhaps. So I just want to make sure of those points. And I think Jody, when she has time, can explain to my colleagues where that hotel tax goes, because there's still confusion, but not now. So just wanted to get that revenue stuff in there. Thanks.
I mean, that was talked about, that we're missing out on $1 million of a hotel tax through not taxing Airbnbs. And so that's all going to be on the table, I'm sure. Okay, Mr. City Manager, sorry, we are going to go on to the next thing. Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item.
That completes the agenda, Mr. Mayor.
So there was one thing that I see on my agenda, and it is ID 257-20. Did you know? Is that you, Rhonda?
That's what we do on public safety. I think that was the name given for us to go around the horn for 5 minutes to say what we've been talking about. I don't think it had anything to do with public safety. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Gerald. I think that's what that was.
Yeah, that's correct. That was just to allow each of the council members to have 5 minutes to discuss what's going on. Because the thought was that you all never get that opportunity during these council work sessions, so that sparked some discussion. But that's also another 40 minutes.
8 times 5.
And I have a trademark on that, Mr. Gerald, so you have to call it something else.
Fred, save us.
Alderman Gay.
I move that we adjourn.
Look, just really quickly, I won't even take the whole 5 minutes, just some important things. We have a legitimate opioid crisis on our hands right now in the city of Annapolis, and particularly in my ward, where, I mean, the numbers have just been ridiculous. And unfortunately, we have not been able to respond in the way that we've responded traditionally with some on-the-ground approaches. And so my ask, and to the city manager and the mayor's office, obviously I'll collaborate, with you, is that just how can we use those resources similar to what we've done in the past to help cope with this issue? Because it's growing. Obviously, the pandemic has a lot to do with that. I know one of the things I mentioned is that maybe we could get some partnership going with either Arundel Lodge or something with $100. I don't know. I threw the number out to the director of the Arundel Lodge, $150,000, as it relates to some programming or resources where they are more prepared. They have the PPE equipment and the staff on hand to handle these issues because, and I think we need to bring it to the community quickly, maybe even out of the brand new resource center that we're unveiling in a couple of weeks. But I just think that that partnership is critical because, you know, the numbers are already expected to surpass last year. And, you know, we were on a call earlier this morning with the delegate's office. And, you know, one of my constituents actually mentioned that it appears daily almost that the department is coming to, if not help with a fatal overdose, just assist with an overdose in a number of our communities. So I just want to, again, shine some light on that and see if we could, in some way, shape, or form, meet the requirements of responding to that. And I think it can be directly pointed back to COVID.
Alderman Gay, have you talked to the new Office of Community Services, MSW, Ms. Lee?
I have not yet personally on the phone. I do have a meeting scheduled or getting scheduled with her and Lynn Farrow. And I've also met and I'm meeting again next week with the lead coordinator, who's great.
Great. So that's a great start. They could, I'm sure, assist tremendously.
Alderman Paone.
Now I move that we adjourn.
All those in favor say aye with a show of hands. Bye. See you all. Meeting adjourned.